Hey guys, welcome back to another interesting Reddit confession story. So without wasting any time, let's start our story with Minecraft gameplay. My GF is pregnant, and I'm not the dad. I'm sitting here in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner at 3 in the morning, watching the neon sign flicker against my windshield and wondering how my entire life managed to catch fire in the span of a single Tuesday afternoon. 3 weeks ago, I was looking at engagement rings and thinking about which suburbs had the best school districts. But tonight, I'm looking at a positive pregnancy test and a medical folder that proves, with absolute, scientific certainty, that the child my girlfriend is carrying cannot possibly be mine. It started like any other normal day in our apartment in Chicago. Sarah and I have been together for 4 years, and for most of that time, I really believed I'd found the one. We met through a mutual friend at a rooftop bar back when I was still trying to figure out my career in architectural drafting, and she was finishing up her nursing degree. There was this instant, easy gravity between us. She was smart, funny in a dry way that caught people off guard, and she had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, even when we were in a crowd of 50. We moved in together after 18 months, and it just worked. We had our routines, our favorite takeout spots, and a shared bank account for the rent. Everything was on track. Or at least, that's what I told myself every morning when I woke up next to her. About 6 months ago, we started talking seriously about the future. Sarah was the one who brought it up first, mentioning how her sister's kids were getting older and how she was starting to feel that biological clock ticking. I wasn't against it, not at all, but I wanted to be responsible. I've always been a planner, sometimes to a fault. I told her I wanted to make sure we were physically and financially ready before we took that leap. We both went for checkups, started eating better, and I even suggested we both get some routine fertility testing done just to make sure there wouldn't be any roadblocks down the line. I didn't think anything of it. It was just another box to tick on my mental checklist of how to be a successful adult. Sarah was a bit hesitant about the testing, saying it felt clinical and took the romance out of it, but she eventually agreed. We went to a clinic near Lincoln Park, did the blood work and the samples, and then we just went back to living our lives. Life got busy. Sarah started pulling extra shifts at the hospital, and I was buried in a massive project for a firm downtown. We were tired, but we were happy, or so I thought. We were still trying, still intimate, still planning that summer trip to Maine. Then, about a month ago, Sarah told me she'd missed her period. I remember the moment so clearly because I actually cried. I'm not usually a crier, but seeing that little plastic stick with the 2 pink lines felt like the beginning of the rest of my life. I hugged her so hard I thought I might break something, and she was laughing and crying too, telling me how much she loved me. We spent that whole night talking about names, about how we'd turn the guest room into a nursery, and whether we should tell our parents right away or wait until the 12-week mark. Looking back, the way she looked at me that night was so convincing that I feel like a complete idiot for not seeing the cracks. The cracks didn't show up until yesterday. I was working from home when the mail came, and tucked between a gas bill and a furniture catalog was a thick envelope from the fertility clinic we'd visited months ago. It was addressed to me. I figured it was just the final summary of our results, or maybe a bill that hadn't been settled. I opened it while I was waiting for my coffee to brew, leaning against the kitchen counter, expecting to see some boring charts about vitamin levels. Instead, I found a detailed report regarding my semen analysis and genetic screening. I read the first page, and then I read it again because I thought there had to be a typo. Then I read it a third time, my heart starting to thud against my ribs like a trapped bird. The report stated, in very clear, cold medical terminology, that I have a condition called bilateral congenital absence of the vas deferens, often associated with a specific genetic mutation. In plain English, it meant that while my body produced sperm, they had no way of actually getting out. The report concluded that I am, and have always been, naturally sterile. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, the sound of the coffee maker gurgling in the background, feeling like the floor had suddenly turned into liquid. I thought maybe they'd swapped my results with someone else's. It happens, right? Labs make mistakes. People get the wrong files. I called the clinic immediately, my voice shaking so much I could barely get my birth date out for verification. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. She confirmed my patient ID, confirmed the date of the sample, and told me that the doctor had actually tried to call me weeks ago to discuss the results, but they had an old phone number on file from when I lived in my old apartment. I hung up and sat down on the floor right there in the kitchen. If I'm sterile, and I've been sterile since birth, then the math of Sarah's pregnancy didn't just fail to add up, it was impossible. I felt this sick, cold wave of nausea wash over me. I tried to think of any other explanation. Maybe I was that 1 in a million medical miracle? But the report was so definitive. It wasn't just a low count. It was a physical blockage that required surgery to even attempt to bypass. I spent the next 4 hours sitting in silence, staring at the front door, waiting for Sarah to get home from her shift. I went through every emotion you can imagine. First, I was devastated because I realized I might never have biological children. Then, I was confused, trying to remember if she'd ever mentioned an ex or a friend I should be worried about. And finally, I was just angry. I was so incredibly angry that she had let me hold her and cry and talk about names for a baby she knew, deep down, couldn't be mine. When the door finally clicked open at 6:30 p.m., I didn't move. Sarah came in, humming to herself, dropping her keys in the bowl by the door. She saw me sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off and jumped a little. "Jesus, Mark, you scared me," she said, laughing as she reached for the light switch. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" The light flicked on, and I just pushed the medical report across the table toward her. I didn't say a word. I just watched her face. I watched the way her eyes scanned the top of the page, the way her brow furrowed as she tried to process the medical jargon, and then the exact moment the color drained out of her skin. She didn't look at me for a long time. She just kept staring at that paper like she was trying to set it on fire with her mind. "Is there something you want to tell me, Sarah?" I asked, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. It was too quiet, too steady. She finally looked up, and her eyes were already welling with tears. "Mark, I don't know what this is. This has to be a mistake. Clinics make mistakes all the time. You know that." "I called them," I said. "They confirmed it. They've been trying to reach me for weeks. So, unless you're carrying the second coming of Christ, we have a very big problem." She started to shake her head, her hands trembling as she held the paper. "No, that's not possible. We were trying, Mark. We were happy. Why would I do that?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out," I told her, standing up. I felt like if I stayed sitting, I was going to explode. "Who is it? Is it someone from the hospital? Is it that guy Julian you're always complaining about? Or maybe it's your hiking buddy from the weekends?" She didn't answer. She just collapsed into the chair and started sobbing, the kind of heavy, gut-wrenching sobs that usually make me want to comfort her. But tonight, they just made me feel cold. I watched her for a few minutes, waiting for a confession, waiting for an explanation that would somehow make this a nightmare I could wake up from. But the longer she stayed silent, the more the reality settled in. Everything we'd built, every plan we'd made, was based on a lie that was now growing inside of her. I didn't stay to hear her excuses. I grabbed my keys and my jacket, and I walked out the door. I've been driving for hours now, circling the city, stopping at this diner just because I didn't know where else to go. I keep looking at my phone, seeing the dozens of texts and missed calls from her, but I can't bring myself to read them. My life was supposed to be starting, but instead, I'm sitting in a neon-lit parking lot, realizing that the woman I loved is a stranger, and the future I was so excited for never actually existed. I spent that first night in a cheap motel off the interstate, staring at the popcorn ceiling and listening to the muffled sound of traffic outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, and then I saw the cold, black ink on the fertility report. The betrayal didn't just feel like a punch to the gut. It felt like my entire identity was being rewritten. I wasn't just losing Sarah. I was losing the version of myself that was going to be a father. By the next morning, the shock had morphed into a desperate, obsessive need to know the truth. I couldn't just walk away without knowing how long this had been going on. Was it a one-time mistake? A moment of weakness? Or had our entire relationship been a facade? I knew I had to go back to the apartment, not to reconcile, but to get answers and, honestly, to get my things. When I pulled into the complex, I saw Sarah's car was still there. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and walked inside. The apartment smelled like stale coffee and the floral perfume she always wore. She was sitting on the couch, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like a ghost. "Mark," she whispered as I walked in. "Please, just let me explain." "I'm listening." I said, staying by the door. I didn't want to get close to her. I didn't want to smell her or see the way her hands were shaking. I needed distance to stay sharp. She started talking, and for the first 10 minutes, it was a mess of apologies and I love yous. But then, the real story started to leak out. It wasn't some random guy from a bar. It wasn't a one-night stand. It was someone I knew. It was Julian, she finally admitted, her voice so low I could barely hear it. Julian, the senior resident at her hospital, the guy she'd spent the last year complaining about. She used to tell me how arrogant he was, how he made her life miserable on the night shifts, how he was the stereotypical doctor with a god complex. I had comforted her after those long shifts, listened to her vent about his ego, and even told her she should report him to HR if he kept being such a jerk. It started about 8 months ago, she said, looking down at her lap. We were working a double shift during that massive multi-car pileup on I-90. It was high stress, everyone was exhausted, and we ended up in the break room together at 4 a.m. We just started talking, not about work, but about life. He told me his marriage was falling apart, and I told him how I felt like we were just going through the motions lately. I felt a sharp sting at that. Going through the motions? Sarah, we were planning a life together. I was looking at rings. I know, she sobbed. And I loved you. I do love you. But Julian, he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It was supposed to be a one-time thing. We went to his car after the shift ended, and I told myself it was just the adrenaline and the exhaustion. But then it happened again, and again. She explained how they'd been meeting up for months. Sometimes after work, sometimes on those extra shifts, she said she was picking up to save money for the baby. My stomach turned as I realized how many times I'd kissed her goodbye, thinking she was going off to save lives, when she was actually going to be with him. Every time she was too tired to hang out with my friends, every time she had a mandatory seminar on a Saturday morning, it was all a lie. But the pregnancy, I said, my voice cracking. You knew we were trying. You knew I wanted this. How could you let me believe it was mine? She looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't just guilt. It was fear. I didn't know for sure, Mark. I really didn't. Julian and I, we were careful, or we thought we were. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I hoped so badly that it was yours. I thought if I just leaned into it, if we both believed it, we could move past everything I'd done. I wanted to choose you. I wanted this to be the thing that fixed us. You wanted to trap me with another man's child to fix us? I felt a laugh bubbling up, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was jagged and ugly. That's not love, Sarah. That's a hostage situation. I was going to tell you, she insisted. After the baby was born, I was going to find a way to make it okay. I didn't know about your condition. I thought we had a chance. The sheer delusion of it was staggering. She had been playing a high-stakes game with my life, and she'd only lost because of a fluke genetic mutation I didn't even know I had. If I hadn't been sterile, I would have spent the rest of my life raising Julian's child, looking into eyes that weren't mine, wondering why the kid didn't look like me, while she kept her little secret tucked away. I started grabbing my essentials, clothes, my laptop, my passport, shoving them into a duffel bag while she followed me around the apartment, pleading with me. She told me Julian didn't even want the baby. He'd told her to take care of it the moment she told him, and that he had no intention of leaving his wife or being a father. She was terrified of being alone, and she was desperate for me to stay, even offering to terminate the pregnancy if that's what it took for me to forgive her. Hearing her say that made me stop in my tracks. She was willing to get rid of the life inside her just to keep the comfortable routine we had. It wasn't about the baby, and it wasn't about me. It was about her not wanting to face the consequences of her own choices. I can't be here, I told her, zipping up the bag. I don't even know who you are. The person I loved doesn't exist. I walked out for the second time, but this time I didn't just drive. I went to my brother's place in the suburbs. Dave is 5 years older than me, a straight shooter who's been through his own share of messy breakups. I showed up at his door at 10 p.m., looking like a wreck, and he didn't even ask questions. He just handed me a beer and pointed to the guest room. Over the next few days, the silence from my end was met with a barrage from hers. She sent long, rambling emails detailing every mistake she'd made, trying to justify the affair by saying I was emotionally distant during the busy season at work. She had her sister call me to tell me Sarah wasn't eating and was worried about her health. She even had the audacity to send me a photo of the first ultrasound, as if that would somehow tug at my heartstrings. But then, the tone of her messages changed. When she realized I wasn't coming back, the desperation turned into something sharper. She started hinting that if I didn't help her, she'd tell everyone it was my fault the relationship ended. She threatened to tell our families that I was the one who cheated or that I was abandoning her in her time of need. It was a classic smear campaign in the making. I knew I needed to protect myself. I went back to the fertility clinic and got a certified, notarized copy of my results. I also started looking through our old phone bills. We were on a family plan, and I found hundreds of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize, all during hours when she was supposedly at work. The evidence was piling up, but the weight of it was crushing. One night, while I was scrolling through those records, I saw a text come in on my own phone from a number I didn't know. "Mark, this is Julian. We need to talk. Sarah is spiraling, and she's making things difficult for both of us. Can we meet?" My heart stopped. The man who had destroyed my future wanted to have a talk. Part of me wanted to find him and vent every ounce of my rage, but a smaller, more calculated part of me knew that this was an opportunity to get the one thing Sarah wouldn't give me, the absolute, unvarnished truth. I agreed to meet him at a quiet bar on the edge of the city. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked exactly like the guy Sarah had described. Expensive haircut, tailored coat, a face that screamed privileged. He looked nervous, though, tapping his fingers on the mahogany bar and looking at the door every few seconds. I sat down next to him, and for a long minute, neither of us said anything. I just stared at the reflection of the bottles behind the bar, feeling the heat of my own anger radiating off me. "Look," Julian said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm not here to apologize. What happened, happened. We're both adults. But Sarah is telling people I promised her a life together. She's threatening to go to my wife, to the hospital board. She's losing it, Mark. And why is that my problem?" I asked, finally looking at him. His eyes were cold, calculating. He didn't care about Sarah, and he certainly didn't care about the baby. He only cared about his reputation. "Because she's telling everyone the baby is yours," he said, leaning in closer. "She thinks if she can convince you to come back, the whole thing goes away. She's told her parents, my colleagues, everyone. But I know about the clinic, Mark. She told me you found out. If you don't set the record straight, she's going to drag us both down with her." I realized then that Sarah wasn't just lying to me. She was weaving a web so complex that she was starting to get caught in it herself. She was trying to play us against each other, hoping that one of us would blink and give her the safety net she so desperately wanted. "I have the papers, Julian," I said, my voice cold. "I have the proof that I'm not the father. I don't need to do anything. You're the one with the pregnant mistress and the wife at home. You're the one with everything to lose." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the mask slip. He was terrified. "What do you want, Mark? Money? I can make this go away for you." I stood up, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape. "I don't want your money, Julian. And I don't want Sarah. I just want the truth to be the only thing left standing when this is over." As I walked out of that bar, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The woman I had planned to marry was a master manipulator, and the man she had replaced me with was a coward. I was stuck in the middle of a disaster I hadn't asked for, but I was done being a victim. I had the truth in my pocket, and it was time to let the fire she started burn everything down. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal consultations and cold, hard realizations. I didn't just want to leave Sarah. I wanted to make sure she couldn't rewrite history. My lawyer told me that since we weren't married, the legalities of the pregnancy were simpler for me, but the social fallout was going to be the real battle. Sarah had already started her abandonment narrative. Her mother called me, screaming about how I could leave a pregnant woman, calling me a coward and a deadbeat. My own mother was confused, heartbroken, asking me if there was any way we could work it out for the sake of the grandchild she'd always wanted. I stayed silent for as long as I could, but the breaking point came when Sarah posted a picture on Instagram. It was a black and white shot of her holding her stomach, with a caption about strength in the face of betrayal and how she was getting ready for this journey alone. The comments were filled with people we both knew, offering support and dragging my name through the mud without even knowing the facts. I knew then that I couldn't just walk away quietly. I didn't want revenge, not really. I just wanted my name back. I arranged a meeting at our old apartment one last time. I told Sarah we needed to discuss the lease and the shared assets, but I also invited her parents and my parents. I knew it was a nuclear option, but after the threats and the lies, I didn't see any other way to stop the bleeding. When I walked into the apartment, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, flanked by her parents, who both looked at me with pure vitriol. My parents were standing by the window, looking uncomfortable and sad. "Mark, what is this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you bring everyone here? This is a private matter." "It stopped being private when you started telling everyone I abandoned my child," I said, putting my bag on the coffee table. I pulled out 3 folders. "I'm not here to argue. I'm just here to provide the facts." I handed one folder to her parents and one to mine. Sarah reached for the third, but I kept my hand on it. "Inside those folders, you'll find 2 things," I said, looking her father in the eye. He was a retired cop, a man who valued honor above everything else. The first is a certified medical report from the fertility clinic we visited months ago. It confirms that I am naturally sterile and have been since birth. It is physically impossible for me to be the father of Sarah's baby. The room went dead silent. I watched her mother open the folder, her eyes scanning the document. I watched the confusion on my own father's face turn into a slow, dawning horror. Sarah sat perfectly still, her face a mask of frozen terror. "The second thing," I continued, "is a printout of our phone records from the last 6 months. It shows hundreds of calls to a man named Julian, a doctor at Sarah's hospital. It shows they were communicating at all hours, including times when she said she was working or with friends. I've also had a conversation with Julian himself, who confirmed the affair and confirmed that he is the likely father." Sarah's father looked at her, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. "Sarah, is this true?" She didn't answer at first. She just looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw a person who had been caught and was looking for any way to escape. "Mark, you didn't have to do this. You're destroying everything." "You destroyed it, Sarah," I said, and my voice was finally steady. "I'm just showing everyone the wreckage. You were going to let me raise another man's child. You were going to let me believe a lie for the rest of my life. And when you got caught, you tried to make me the villain." The fallout was immediate and chaotic. Her mother started crying. Her father stood up and walked out of the room without saying a word to her, and my parents just looked at me with a profound, aching pity. Sarah tried to grab my arm as I turned to leave, but I stepped back. "I'm off the lease," I told her. "The landlord has the paperwork. I've taken my half of the savings, and I've moved the rest of my things. Don't call me again. Don't have your sister call me. We are done." I walked out of that apartment for the last time, and as the door clicked shut, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. It wasn't a win. There are no winners in a situation like this. I was still a man who had lost his partner and his future in one fell swoop. But as I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. I felt like myself again. The months that followed were quiet. I moved into a small studio apartment closer to my office. I went to therapy to deal with the trauma of the betrayal and the news of my sterility. It was a hard pill to swallow, realizing that the biological path to fatherhood was closed to me. But my therapist helped me see that being a father isn't just about genetics. It's about the choice to show up, a choice Sarah had robbed me of by trying to force a lie on me. I heard through the grapevine that Julian's wife found out everything. Apparently, once I talked to him, he got sloppy, or maybe he just couldn't keep the lie straight anymore. She left him, and the hospital ended up launching an internal investigation into his conduct with staff. Sarah moved back in with her parents. She had the baby, a little boy. I saw a picture of him once on a mutual friend's feed before I blocked everyone. He had dark hair and a sharp jawline, even as an infant. He looked exactly like Julian. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that night in the diner. I think about the man I was, the one who thought he had it all figured out, who believed in the happily ever after with the perfect girl. That guy is gone, and in a weird way, I'm glad. He was living in a dream world, and the reality, as painful as it was, is much more solid ground to stand on. Last week, I went on my first date in over a year. She's an illustrator, someone who laughs with her whole body and doesn't mind that I'm a bit of a quiet person. We were sitting in a small bistro, and the topic of kids came up, as it eventually does. I didn't hide from it. I told her the truth. that I can't have biological children, but that I'm open to other ways of building a family when the time is right. She just nodded, took my hand, and said, "That's okay, Mark. There are plenty of ways to be a father. What matters is the kind of man you are." I'm still healing, and some days the anger still flickers in the back of my mind like that old neon sign. But mostly, I'm just grateful. Grateful that the truth came out when it did. Grateful that I didn't spend my life building something on a foundation of sand. I'm 32 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm not planning 10 steps ahead. I'm just living, one day at a time, knowing that whatever comes next, it'll be real. And that's enough for me.